Real talk for real people, right here in the Inland Empire. We are 1050 AM KCAA.
Welcome to Money Talk. I'm Jesse Torres.
And I'm Aaron Michael Sanchez.
All right, Aaron, Wednesday, 4 p.m., another afternoon of Money Talk.
You know, I'm so excited for this one. You've got some really interesting entrepreneurs on today's show.
Yeah, today we, a lot of times our guests, they sort of come from the same general industry, and it just kind of turns out that way. But today we really have a really nice, diverse cast of guests, and I'm excited because of their diversity. I think we're all going to learn quite a bit today.
Yeah, there's so much to learn in business, and when it comes to fashion, there's some things I did not know about fashion that now I'm aware of, and I'm like, oh, like I didn't even realize some clothes come from trees. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in a few moments, we're going to be speaking with a New York-based designer, and she's going to be sharing with us some of the technology that is now being deployed and deployed specifically in her company to not only make great women's clothing for professionals, but also in a manner that saves on waste, that prevents or minimizes waste. So that's exciting. But later on in the hour, we're going to be speaking with Joe Rogers, who is the founder of Ambiz Angels, and they've got a real interesting thing going on over there. What they do is they use crowdsourcing from large companies to provide funding to startups and other emerging firms. And so, as we speak to all these entrepreneurs that come by, in many cases, a lot of these are companies that are very new, very cash strapped. They're not, they don't have the level of capital perhaps that they need, especially if they have a big win, and they're always out there hustling. And so we're going to be speaking with Joe Rogers from Ambiz Angels, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how he is able to bring in crowdsourced dollars from the big players and then redistribute it to the smaller guys. And then we're going to finish the hour with Drew Levitch, who is the founder of an interesting concept, Damn It Dolls. And I know that's going to be a real fun segment. This is.
I think you just booked that just so you could actually say "damn it" because it's the name of the.
Exactly right.
DAMMIT. Right.
So we'll be speaking with him about his interesting concept and how he helps folks get the stress out. But before that, we have on the phone Natalia Allen. Natalia, welcome to Money Talk.
Thank you.
So Natalia, this is really interesting. I was looking at your background and I was reading up on the company, and you've gone and done something that is pretty interesting. My mother grew up in the Los Angeles-based fashion industry, and so when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time downtown running around, and I would see these folks design clothing, and they would literally use these pins and this vellum type, this paper type product, and then they would use it as a mold to then cut the fabric, and then they make all these creations. You and your company, you've pretty much done away with that, and you've just decided to leverage technology to take it to the next level.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We're sort of applying our design and creativity to the supply chain, not just the product.
So why don't you, for those folks that are not familiar with your line of clothing, why don't you sort of tell us a little something about what type of clothing that is that you make, and then maybe you can kind of jump into how it is that you differ from the competition.
Sure. So I graduated Parsons School of Design here in New York City, and I graduated Designer of the Year. And rather than work for a group of designers as an assistant, I was able to work with a number of multinationals as a design innovator, and that was because my thesis work really focused on wearable technology, so integrating smart textiles and innovative manufacturing processes into the actual collection. And it was during that time that I think I evolved in understanding not just the design process, but also the fashion industry. So seeing at an industrial commercial scale how clothes were made, and also how they were sold and mostly disposed of prematurely. And
Well, Natalia,
yeah.
I was reading that and I didn't really understand. I didn't even know that this was happening. Can you give our listeners an idea of what happens behind the scenes? That's, I think you mentioned in one interview, very atrocious things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are three big issues, right, that we sort of have to address, and I think the industry is slowly waking up. One is toxicity. So there are chemical inputs that are used pervasively in the fashion industry, which are known carcinogens, neurotoxins, they're endocrine disruptors, and basically skin being a very large organ, it's not a great idea to put these things in our clothes and then to wear them day after day. Another issue, obviously, is waste in how clothes are manufactured. So just the understanding that when we build something, there is an inherent waste, and that acceptance seems to become like the norm. Then there's also the fact that fashion is getting faster in terms of its life cycle. So there's an understanding that clothes will be discarded of, just even clothes that were made and never even had a chance to be sold because the cycle is so fast. So there's just a carelessness about what we make and how much we make. And these items, they're dumped in other countries, usually developing nations, developing economies, or sometimes just in landfills here in developed nations like the U.S. And finally, there's I think, an issue with human rights, and I consider it just exploitative labor, generally paid, sometimes not, but paid very poorly, and exploiting the fact that there are women, because most clothing workers are women, in these developing nations that are just so desperate for a job that they'll frankly do almost anything. And so rather than pay them in a reasonable scale for the economies that they live in, many brands just take advantage of the desperation. So those are the three sort of major issues that I felt were unacceptable, and I sort of had an issue with just kind of like sitting back and going with the flow.
So how, Natalia, you noted these issues, the toxicity, the waste, relative to the short life cycles, and the human rights issues. So at what point did you then have that aha moment and say, I love the industry. You've dedicated yourself, you've studied hard, you've received the accolades. At what point did that aha moment come and say, if I apply technology to this, I can actually address all of these issues?
So the interesting thing is, 10 years ago, we were integrating computers, into jackets, right? So we had wearable devices. The things that we were able to do in terms of a technological standpoint was pretty inspiring and pretty compelling. And to answer your question specifically, it was getting out of that atelier, the studio, the school setting, and getting into factories, right? Going to textile mills, actually sourcing the components. Because as a designer, I was really responsible also for commercializing the concepts. It wasn't enough to just sketch them. So I actually had to liaise with the factories and meet the factory workers and understand the towns and the environments that they lived in and the conditions under which they worked. So that for me was the aha moment. That was the inspiration to then apply the same thinking, right? The same creativity, the same ingenuity to making great clothes, but making it in a better way.
I want to make a note that you actually have consulted for global brands on their sustainability practices, like DuPont, Donna Karan, Calvin Klein. I love Calvin Klein stuff, by the way. But, when it comes to fashion and doing this, I think Jesse and I are both like, well, how come this hasn't been done? And why is it not being done all over?
So it's a great question. In my opinion, it's slowly happening. And I would say that one of the largest reasons it's not happening is that the industry, the way in which we know it, was developed over a period of, say, 20 to 30 years. And we can get really specific and in-depth, but I'll try to stay at the surface. Essentially, most things were made most things that were consumed in the U.S. were made in the U.S. From the fibers that were grown in the South to the textiles that were spun in the middle of the country to eventually the shops that you had in places like New York City, which produced most of the nation's clothes, and also L.A., as you pointed out. So we had a very tight-knit, control on the industry, and the U.S., because of our unions and so forth and so on, we had, standards that these corporations had to live by and work by. Around 1980, you started to have the introduction of free trade agreements. And so, the belt was unbuckled, so to speak. And you now have a majority of the industry, over 90%, existing in other countries. And these countries are not at the same level, if you will, in terms of human rights. Their economies are still developing, and thus their social infrastructure is also developing. So now you have this, this free reign for corporations to work within and build within. But more importantly, over that span of time, so now we're talking 20 to 30 years, there has been a tremendous amount of investment, capital investment into, the development of factories, et cetera, in these places. And so it's very difficult, I would think, for a publicly traded company with rigorous demands in the marketplace on a quarterly basis to all of a sudden, within a period of a year, transform sort of these issues that we've discussed. I mean, to change the labor in your organization, I mean, that's a large percentage of the cost of making a good. So if you've become accustomed to paying people next to nothing, then why and how as an organization do you compel your board of directors, your chief executive, your, the other people on deck, that this is something that you must do. So that's more or less my understanding.
Yeah, and those are great points, and that's the problem I think that we have in general with innovation within the large organizations is that they feel that they're so vested, they have these huge capital investments, and they feel that if they change things midstream, they're not going to get the bang for their buck at that point. But let's I think what this does, and I think what you've shown with your success early on, is that because these large organizations are less willing to make these significant changes, it opens up an opportunity for innovative and, albeit smaller, but highly innovative organizations such as yours to sort of jump in and fill that need. We've been hearing for the last few years a whole lot about these 3D printers, and on the upside, they can produce and they can make some pretty neat stuff. On the downside, we've heard about them being capable of making things such as guns. I mean, they're so effective. Do you see in the near future, the ability to, rather than you manufacture this clothing, you creating the blueprint that someone can download and then make a customized business apparel for themselves based on their own measurements taken at home? I mean, do you see the future of clothing going in that direction at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we refer to it as distributed production, and I definitely see clients and the individual person being able to have the option to sort of DIY, do it yourself. And I think that's something that's a little bit of a ways off, but it's certainly on the horizon.
Now, okay, you've got women's fashion, but I want to know: are you doing men's fashion with this?
Presently, no, but it's not too far off for us. It's something that we'd like to tackle.
We need the Jesse Torres line because this guy wears some snazzy stuff.
Oh, really?
No, no. Now he's telling a fib. You
So
probably
you
need
need
the
to
Jesse.
fashion him.
I am a fashion faux pas wherever I go. So people like to keep me indoors for that very reason. But Natalia, so what do you see as the future for your company? I mean, where do you see yourself going now that you've gone about and implemented this high tech approach? What's the next? What do you see happening next for your company as well as for the industry? Because I'm sure you've, to a large extent, sort of opened some eyes.
Yeah, thanks. I think that for my organization, we have a very simple mission. It's to provide a great customer experience and build a great product. And that product assortment will most definitely continue to evolve. And I use the word evolve very purposely because I think that, the pressure on designers to just create more stuff is very real. And just to give you an example, a traditional design house would produce 2 to 3 collections a year, and now it's anywhere from 12 to 30. So I think, growing the business clearly, but growing it in a way that is authentic, to the brand and the principles by which I started it. So